My name is Ashok Malhotra. I'm the chair of the Yoga and Meditation Society for the Scientific Study of Spirituality. We have a wonderful speaker today with us, Dr. Swami Ajaya, who got a PhD from Berkeley, and he was also ordained as a Swami by the famous Swami Rama of the Himalayas. And Swami Rama had ordained many other Swamis, but Swami Rama chose this gentleman, this doctor, so that he could study the mysteries of yoga psychology and compare it with Western schools of psychology. And his topic of discussion today is the ecology of chakras. Chakras are the energy centers which distribute consciousness in different parts of the body. Along with Swami Ajaya, we also have Dr. Douglas Schrader with us. Dr. Douglas Schrader is a distinguished teaching professor at SUNY Anta. He's also the chairman of the philosophy department. And we have also Dr. Mark Rice, who is the director of our Wellness Counseling Center at SUNY Anta. I'm delighted to have this panel today, and we are going to have a lot of fun talking about this mysterious thing called Tantric Yoga and the 7 chakras. In the West, especially in the United States, people look at Tantric Yoga as something which has to do with sexuality, and they have really taken it to the other extreme. Mm-hmm. And what we want to know from you is that what is the authentic system of Tantra in which these 7 chakras are discussed, mm-hmm. and how the interface between philosophy, science, and religion takes place, mm-hmm. when you're talking about these 7 chakras. Give us a very simple kind of idea of what these chakras are, mm-hmm. so that our audience can understand.
Yes, well, yes. Tantra is really a very profound science. It's comparable to our sciences. In the West, we have sciences that deal with the material universe. We have physics and chemistry that allow us to have vast abilities that by our understanding of these sciences. We have all kinds of abilities to heal ourselves through medicine, to all kinds of things. And Tantra is really an inner science. Our psychology in the West is only, 150 years old. But Tantra is a science of psychology, of consciousness that dates back thousands of years old, thousands of years. And it's an inner science of how the world is constructed, just as we have chemistry that describes the elements and how they interact. So Tantra is a science that describes different themes of consciousness, or we might say different archetypes, to use a Jungian term. That there are basic themes in life that we enact again and again in different situations. And according to Tantra, there are 7 basic themes that underlie all the dramas of life. And if we understand these themes, we can understand and master the issues that come up in these areas of life. And it's a developmental psychology. Just as in the West, we've have developmental psychology like Piaget and others, how the child grows through certain stages. So these 7 themes are themes of our own conscious evolution through certain stages, from the most primitive issues of life on to the highest levels of awareness that are most inclusive and most healing.
Yes. Could you specify these 7 different chakras, these 7
yes.
different, as you use the term, developmental stages?
Mm-hmm.
So if you just, you don't have to use Sanskrit words. You can go through it simply
yes.
in English translation, and try to locate them in different parts of the body.
Yes. So these centers, or these themes, have correspondences at a physical level, a psychological level, an emotional level. So at the physical level, the most primitive, the first of these centers, is at the base of the spine. And it's the issue there, the theme that's the most primitive, is the theme of survival. Our most basic concern is getting enough food to eat, being able to survive the cold winters here in this part of the country, you know,
Yes.
having our basic needs met. So there are many issues in life around the issues of survival,
Right.
and some people it's more they're more concerned. We're fairly comfortable. We've mastered that, so we can go on to the other themes in life. But in many parts of the world, in inner cities, in our country, in war zones, that theme of survival is a big issue and a big preoccupation, and there's not the energy left and the consciousness to deal with the more important, the more evolved issues in life. Then the second of these themes is at the a little bit higher along the body in the genital area, and that concerns the issue of sensuality and desire and wanting to have enjoyable experiences, pleasure of the senses, pleasure of taste and touch and sight and sexuality, pleasure through sexuality that integrates these different senses. And so when we're functioning from that chakra, then our concern is, our preoccupation is maximizing our pleasure. We want to have pleasures, and that overrides our other concerns. And that can be a problem if we're too much focused and preoccupied with having pleasure, or if we suppress that chakra and we think, oh, we should be, you know, we shouldn't indulge ourselves very much, and we're too restrictive, that can be a problem.
Okay.
So at each of these centers, the issue is, can we have a balance and the right understanding of how to live it with that issue of pleasure in a way that enhances our relationships, enhances our sense of self.
Yes.
The third chakra is about the sense of power, the sense of accomplishment. Can I be a successful person in life? Can I master my life? And here we can have an imbalance. Some people want to dominate other people, and on the other side, some people feel I don't have any power, and they're easily dominated.
And this one is located as our belly button.
Yes, this is
somewhere here.
Yes, in the solar plexus.
Solar plexus. Okay.
And this is where our energy is. It's in this center because all these themes come together.
Right.
At the physical level, this is where digestion takes place.
Right.
Where we get our energy, and psychologically it's where we get the energy and the willpower and enthusiasm.
All the
life.
food goes in and it burns there and supplies that power.
The energy,
that
yes,
energy.
to the whole body.
Yes, and the next one is...
The next is at the heart center. And here the theme is, and you see this is an evolution from the instinctual. At the heart center is the focus and the concern is out of my sense of having developed a sense of well-being and capacity. Now I want to share that capacity in generosity toward others, to giving, toward loving others. How can I share the sense of well-being and love others, nurture others, sponsor others for their well-being? So this is to be open-hearted, to be giving and generous at this chakra.
Okay,
and
that's the heart level.
At the heart level, yes.
And we
the
keep
next,
going up.
The next, yes, we keep going up. It's like rising along the ladder of consciousness. At the next center is the throat center. And whereas at the heart center, we were having a humanistic philosophy, a humanistic view of concern for other human beings and their well-being, now we begin to look upward toward what is greater even than human beings. Is there a transcendent function? Is there a higher power? Whether we call it God or a larger system that understands and includes the whole universe, not just the human level.
Right.
So this is the theistic, being interested in what's our purpose, our higher purpose in life. Where are we going in our evolution and with life? And so here we have a more devotional approach to life. Okay. We become devoted to what is higher and a higher purpose.
Right. And so then we keep going from here, and then we go up to the third eye, some people have called it.
The third eye.
Where the dualism ceases, and you bring the object and subject together, and there's a blend.
Yes.
Some have called that chakra as a mystical chakra. The mystics have talked about it.
Yes.
So what do you think about that?
Yes, it is. It's a mystical because it's mysterious in our ordinary consciousness. But if we come to that level of awareness, there's nothing mysterious about it. It's only a little bit strange because we're not familiar with it. So in our ordinary way of knowing, this is about knowing this chakra. And our usual way of knowing is to know through the mind. And the mind knows in terms of subject and object.
Right.
I'm here and I know about the cup there or the pitcher there.
Right.
But we're separate from what we know.
Uh-huh.
There's this third eye, the awakening of this center. When we're functioning from this center, we realize that there's another kind of knowing. It's might call it mystical. Martin Buber talked about I-it knowing and I-thou knowing, where there's an intimate, more direct knowing that's not just through thinking, but through an openness that really engages completely with what we're knowing. It's the level of intuitive knowledge, of seeing.
Integrative, intuitive knowledge.
Yes, yes.
And then you have a seventh chakra now.
The seventh,
Tell
even
us.
something beyond that.
Yeah, something beyond knowing. Yes.
And at the crown of the head, it's called, in Indian tradition, a thousand-petaled lotus, is the most awakened state of consciousness that sometimes we read about someone who's achieved a very higher state of awareness. And it's simply a state of knowing that's not limited. We're limited by, this is my perspective, and I only see things, what I've known in my life and my own perspective. But we can leave that perspective and open to an awareness that is just simply the truth of what is, that doesn't have a prejudice that I like it to be this way instead of that way. I desire it to be this way. I want this. And so that puts blinders on what we see. So it's opening to what is really true in the moment. And it's an awareness that's non-judgmental, that doesn't exclude anything. It doesn't favor anything. It's the awareness of just an openness to being present here and now. There's this book, The Power of Now. It's about being here, present, experiencing the now in all of its fullness. And it takes us beyond our individuality, beyond our sense of separateness, which causes anxiety and concern when we feel like I'm a separate person. So it's that universal consciousness that we think is something beyond our capacity, but it really is the essence of who each of us is. We all, in our essence, in our core, are that awareness when we stop, when we're no longer preoccupied with our fears and our concerns. We can come into that awareness.
Yeah, the way you put these, seven chakras and the way you translated them, starting with the most primitive level, protecting my body, protecting the solid part of me, the elemental part of me, which is security, and moving from there to the level of sensations, to the level of instincts, and then moving from there to the level of developing that kind of ego sense, individuality, the power. And from there, moving in the direction of becoming a little bit more of a spirit. That's what the heart level is. And from there, you really become spirit, which is expressive, from being centered about oneself to be centered on other people, thinking other. It's like not only there is a self-regard at the heart level, you go to the throat level, there is the regard for the other, and waiting for this wonderful encompassing kind of deity, encompassing kind of reality, transcendence, of which we all are a part. And from there, you move on to breaking all this, what we call disunity, the divisiveness which our intellect offers, the divisiveness which comes from our ordinary way of looking at things, where we categorize things. You try to merge that, collapse it into one eye instead of two.
That's a
and
good
so
way.
there is a mystical unity which is brought about. And so from there you go even to the highest possible awareness, which is the source of all these seven. So we are moving from the most primitive to the most encompassing awareness. And this is what the chakras are really telling us, and they can be related to many different aspects.
Yes.
Now we have two other scholars here, Dr. Schrader from philosophy might have some question for you, and Dr. Rice, who might have some particular issues with what you have just said.
Well, I don't have issues with what you've said, but you began by describing the tantric system as a science or a set of sciences, indeed even physical sciences. And as you know, the Templeton Foundation, which provides funding for our yoga and meditation society, is particularly interested in the interface between science and spirituality. So at a very simplistic level, as a Westernly trained scientist, do you regard the physical location of the chakras that you've described as literal or metaphoric? That is, if we were to look at an individual whom you analyze in your practice as being somewhat caught at the ego level, would the distribution of energy in their body look different from someone who's more into, say, the devotion level or the love level or whatever? Would we be able to find physical correlations for that? I think particularly of Barney Clark, who was the first person in the United States to receive a totally artificial heart. He and his wife were, of course, concerned about his survival, right, back down at the very first chakra, but they also expressed concern about whether he would still be able to love his wife if they took out his organ, his heart, and put in a totally artificial heart. And it's that sort of thing that, you know, metaphorically we describe the heart as the seat of emotion, the seat of love, and so on. In fact, as far as we can tell, Barney loved his wife just as much in the months that he had after that operation as before. So generally, do you take the chakras as a good, convenient way of organizing some concepts, or do you take them as literal locations in the body?
Well, I would say both. I mean, you certainly, if you dissect the body, you're not going to find the word chakra means wheel, or, and you're not going to find some kind of physical organ that corresponds to the chakras, although the physical organs that we do have, like the heart, the digestive organs, the genital organs, are physical expressions of an issue at that chakra, and I guess in that way you could say they're metaphorical. The chakras are metaphorical. They're a metaphor that brings together the integration of different issues at these different centers. So while there's literally not a physical chakra, there are the physical organs that correspond to that nexus, that integration of the levels. And those organs are affected when we have psychological issues that correspond to the issues of that chakra. For example, a person who has issues around sexuality, where there's a deficiency in letting that their sexuality be expressed, or where there's a hysterical person who's very emotional and who is overly indulgent in that chakra, will tend to have physical issues with the sexual organs, and they may have hysterectomies or other. I'm not saying all hysterectomies. Don't misunderstand me. But they'll tend to have issues, and someone who has trouble opening their heart emotionally and being generous will tend to have physical issues with their heart. So there are, in that sense, I think if we did studies on this and tried to integrate the psychology and the physical, we would find a correspondence.
It's correspondences, but not literally the same.
Well, to push the point slightly further, using a different culture as a basis, I'm reminded of Qigong, and in particular of manifestations like Tai Chi, where they speak about the flow of energy throughout the body and different energy centers, and also blockages that occur that have the type of psychological effects that you're talking about. Now, the idea within Qigong is that this is a literal flow of energy, and that through certain postures, through certain movements and so on, that you're able to open up those energy channels. And then as you open up the energy channels, you will see the change in terms of your attitude and so on. Would it, in your opinion, be of benefit to sit in certain yoga postures and things of that sort if what you're having is an arrest at a particular chakric level, or do you need to see a psychotherapist to talk it out, or is it a combination of those? How do you see that interplay between psychology and the physical organism?
I think each of those can be very beneficial. I think that certain yoga postures, certain physical practices can help to release and open centers and release energy. And as a psychotherapist and psychologist, I find it extremely helpful to work psychologically to explore the issues in that center and to really go into them. I think we tend to avoid, if we're uncomfortable in some area, we tend to want to avoid the situation and fix it. But I think if we turn toward and face and explore into whatever is disturbing us, that we can go further into it and release blocked energies.
I think Dr. Rice might have a question there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I had a slightly different question, but I also enjoyed what you said about the chakras, particularly the drama that they symbolize, and the different dramas at different evolutionary levels, and it's a development. And it strikes me that Western culture may be pretty stuck at this power chakra and sensuality seem to me, as I hear you, the two that stand out the most for Western culture, and to some extent perhaps Western science, focusing on power and control and prediction. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how yoga and particularly yoga's bringing in some of the higher evolutionary dramas, how that can inform Western science to perhaps expand or grow beyond that power, control, prediction level. I'm actually interested in that also on the individual level, how the individual grows beyond that power in this culture, but I'm also at a larger issue about science and culture.
That's a big question, and it's a fascinating question. I mean, even our psychologies today, the development of ego psychology is psychology that helps us deal with problems around the issues of this chakra, but from the perspective of enhancing and developing the ego. And we don't have as well developed psychologies that lead us beyond the ego to the higher chakras. But I want to say something interesting, that even in the Eastern system, in Tantra, there are people and there are schools of Tantra well established where the people try to use that science, the practitioners, for gaining powers, you know, for shamanistic practices, powers over nature, just as we have powers over nature through science. So the Eastern teachings can also be, if I could say, misused or used for a lower purpose, unless, and so that's a concern I have even about the use of Tantra in a way that's a practice of magic, a practice of even witchcraft, comparable to witchcraft. But Tantra can be used also for a higher purpose. So the more we evolve to the opening and experiencing the generosity from the heart and a sense of our connection with a higher purpose, and more moving into a sense of awareness that's accepting and generous and accepting of all that is, we can, that energy can flow down into the lower centers, and we can, it's one way that I like to think about it is that we're growing, and you express some of this too, from a smaller system. The personality, the ego, is looking at the world in terms of I, what I can do. It's a limited system in this vast world. This I that I am is very limited, and that's a little bit scary to be so small in this big world. But we can move, as we move to the higher centers, we're moving to seeing the world from a larger system, a more inclusive perspective. So when we're generous and relational, we're seeing my family, my country, my humanity is not separate from me. And when we move to the highest center, we see that everything is inclusive and not separate. So so this center here, this power center, is a very limited perspective.
And so from a higher perspective, would the person become less involved with power, or would they use power in a different way?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had an experience that answered that for me, and that is when I'm focused on my ego and personality, then I'm interested in having power over somebody, in aggrandizing myself. But when we're coming from here, then power isn't my power over somebody else. It's just the experience of the power of creation of this world, the universal power. So it's not dualistic as me versus somebody else. There's no top dog and underdog. There's just the sharing of energy and the sharing of the capacity to create and the capacity for well-being.
That's wonderful. We have only a minute and a half left here. And I would like to know from you that there are close to 50 million Americans who do some kind of yoga or meditation practice. Now, there are others who want to join hands. How can knowledge of Tantra or chakra system help them? And what will be the simple kind of suggestions you will make? If somebody is stuck on one of these chakras, how can they undo it so that they can use this higher kind of awareness to some others use this particular chakra in a more productive way? I know I'm not giving you much time.
Well, there's so many ways to come into the higher centers. You know, for example, just if interest in chanting and devotion here, this center, prayer are ways to bring one into awareness and expression through a higher center of consciousness, through any acts of generosity to opening our heart, therapy through all kinds of spiritual relating to in spiritual traditions. So simply following how we're led, how we can express ourselves through our hearts and through our creativity and devotion. And so there's so many avenues that I'm not sure I could say just one way or another.
I was listening to NPR a couple of days ago, and they were trying to talk about how you can help your heart and live a healthy life. And they suggested 5 things. First one was drink a glass of red wine each day, eat dark chocolate every day, a little bit, and then they said make love 3 times a week. Then they said do exercise, which involves taking a walk, and then they said get involved with yoga and meditation. So that was part of that 5 stuff. So that's what I was asking you.
So let me just give one if there's a moment. So.
Yes.
And I would say that the essence of coming into our whole well-being is simply acceptance and love, and loving all of ourselves instead of judging ourselves, learning to live from a place of acceptance and unconditional positive regard, to borrow a phrase, for ourselves and others, and all the parts of ourselves that we've been negative to, that we've disliked, to learn to be even loving of those parts and integrate those parts. And if we just did that, if we learned self-acceptance, that would cure most of our difficulties.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Rice. Thank you, Dr. Schrader. And thank you, Dr. Ajaya.
Okay, my
wonderful.
pleasure. You're welcome. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's really great.